Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading American Trade Unionism by William Z. Foster. This is chapters 35, 36, and 37. Chapter 35. The Historic Necessity of Trade Union Unity. As the workers and the people generally in this country face the many difficult domestic and foreign problems of the post-war period, the split in the American labor movement looms more and more a menace in their hopes and aspirations. Whichever way one looks, there are to be seen evidence of the harm and folly of permitting the internecine struggles between the AFL and the CIO to continue. It has become a most urgent necessity, therefore, not only to organized labor, but to the whole nation that the rupture in the ranks of the trade union movement be healed as promptly and as thoroughly as possible. There is no sane reason why the AFL and the CIO should not get together at once, either in one all-inclusive federation or, as a step in that direction, linking their forces in a whole series of collaborative movements for immediate objectives. The main reason why such unity has not been brought about is the obstructive policies in the top leadership of the AFL, who are putting their own personal interests above the welfare of the labor movement as a whole. It was these same elements who caused the split in the first place 10 years ago. They were quite willing then to see the basic industries remain unorganized, rather than to risk their own positions by bringing great new masses of workers into AFL unions. So they caused the split which forced the CIO to become an independent movement. And now it is these identical bureaucrats who, for the same selfish reasons, are preventing unity between the AFL and CIO, and who indeed would like nothing better than to have the CIO unions broken up altogether. The split, by dividing the ranks of labor, drastically weakens the whole democratic cause. There we see the AFL leadership nationally and in various states at cross purposes with the CIO on legislation vitally needed. Characteristically, too, in the recent Detroit mayoral elections, Richard Frankenstein, the Labor candidate, could have been elected had it not been that the local AFL leadership, headed by Frank Martel, opposed him and supported the reactionary candidate, Jeffries. Similar situations are constantly occurring in local elections. The split is also compromising the present big campaign of labor for wage increases. Not only is there no common program of demands and no unity of action between the two national labor federations, but the AFL leaders seem to be more anxious to defeat the CIO, which is leading the general movement, than they are to secure wage advances for their own members. The split is also provoking a whole series of jurisdictional quarrels and strikes of the two groups of unions against each other, with the AFL on the offensive. Such internal strife literally poisons public opinion against the labor movement generally, and it is highly provocative of hostile anti-trade union legislation. The split likewise interferes with the organization of the millions of still unorganized workers, what with the various unions instigated by the top AFL leadership, fighting over the control of the workers who are already organized. Nothing is more harmful to organizing work than just such internal squabbles. The split, too, is having a disastrous effect upon labor's position in the current Labor Management Conference. For the AFL leaders, aided by John L. Lewis, do not hesitate in their war against the CIO to line up with the employers in order to defeat the progressive measures proposed by the CIO. The split also extends its deadly influence out upon a world scale, as witness the AFL refusal to affiliate with the CIO to the new World Federation of Trade Unions, and its shameful attempts to disrupt this vitally needed World Labor Organization. It is about time that the workers took this dangerous split situation in hand and remedied it. The reactionary trusts and monopolies of this country are now on the march. They are determined not only to cripple organized labor in this country, but also to reduce the whole world under their imperialist sway. World reaction now has its most powerful center right here in the United States. And American labor cannot solve all the big problems involved in this situation with its own forces split right down the middle. If organized labor, facing this difficult situation, does not heal its internal split, It will be inviting a major disaster to itself and to American democracy in general. It is necessary, therefore, that the AFL membership wake up to the danger presented by their reactionary leaders and bring about unity with the CIO in spite of them. It is absolute folly to expect the Greens, Wolls, Lewises, Hutchisons, Dubinskis, and similar reactionaries will do anything to bring about labor unity, for their whole aim is to keep labor split. The unification process must be advanced by the rank and file and by the lower officials among whom a strong unity spirit exists. AFL leaders opposed to this splitting policy of the Wolls and Hutchisons must be encouraged. Only a strong and organized pressure by the rank and file and pro-unity forces in the AFL can free the AFL Council to abandon its labor-splitting policy. The present big wage movement, the fight for full employment legislation, and the establishment of the New World Federation of Trade Unions have brought about many local movements of direct cooperation or of parallel action between the AFL, CIO, and railroad unions. These are steps in the right direction. Such spontaneous movements of unity at the bottom should be encouraged in every way possible. They must be extended to include such demands as the removal of American troops from China and the internationalization of the atomic bomb. For it is an obvious fact that unity between the AFL and the CIO, when eventually it is achieved, will be brought about by AFL rank-and-file pressure notwithstanding the resistance of the top AFL leadership. The question of labor unity is not one that will wait indefinitely. The host of great problems pressing for solution forbid delay. And one of the most vital of these urgent problems relates to the congressional elections of 1946. In these elections, the reactionaries are going to make a most determined effort to foster their deadly grip more tightly upon an already dangerously reactionary Congress. For organized labor to go into these elections divided into two warring camps, with one camp, the AFL, going along with the enemy, would be suicidal folly. For 10 long years, the American trade union movement has suffered from the present great split. It cannot tolerate it any longer without running a serious danger. The split must be healed, and it can be healed when the progressive forces in the AFL wake up and take the job in hand. Organic unity of the AFL and CIO or cooperation movements between them would be a tremendous step forward for the workers. It would give the whole democratic movement in the United States a great new strength for the stupendous tasks now confronting it. 1945. Chapter 36. The Peril of Red Baiting. A serious disease in the labor movement, and one that must be combated, is the widespread practice of red baiting. Thus, in many AFL and some CIO unions, various leaders are carrying on a violent campaign of denunciation against the communists, accusing them of all sorts of vicious anti-union, anti-democratic, and anti-American practices. In many instances, communists are specifically prohibited from holding official union positions or even from being members of the union. Usually this red baiting is accompanied by reckless attacks upon the USSR and often by ill-concealed anti-Semitism, anti-Negroism, anti-Catholicism, anti-foreignerism, and the like. It is employer poison in the ranks of the labor movement. Red baiting is not political criticism. It is political persecution, just as anti-Semitism and Jim Crowism are persecution. It is a weapon of reaction, taken straight from the arsenal of the late, unlamented Adolf Hitler. Its purpose is to develop an ideological terrorism, first against the communists, then against all the progressive forces, and eventually against the unions themselves. Red baiting opens the way for the most dangerous attacks by employers against the labor movement. Although workers are not so easily deceived by red baiting as they used to be, since they have heard men like President Roosevelt and Sidney Hillman denounced as Reds by Thomas E. Dewey in the 1944 election campaign, nevertheless it would be a big mistake to underestimate its destructive effects in the unions. Red baiting seeks to weaken the effectiveness of the most clear-headed and devoted workers in the labor movement by singling them out for vicious attacks. It works to undermine the cooperative relations between that progressive combination of forces, the left wing and the center, upon which all advances of the labor movement depend. And it also serves as an effective cover-up for the agents of the imperialists and the warmongers in the labor movement. Red baiting and reaction go hand in hand. The union that tolerates red baiting leaves itself wide open to the assaults of the worst forces of reaction. Among the worst red baiters in the labor movement are the social democratic trade union leaders. These people, who have nothing socialist about them, cover up their alliances with the wolves, etc., and also their own reactionary policies by delivering fierce tirades against the communists. Their Hate Russia campaign is no less virulent than that of the Hearst press. They are eager supporters of every move of reaction looking towards a war against the USSR. The Trotskyites and the social democratic leaders who presume to speak in the name of labor and socialism make attacks upon the communists and the USSR their chief stock in trade. Their whole line furnishes material to those reactionary elements who are seeking an anti-Soviet war. Typically, Norman Thomas, a so-called socialist, all through the war saw not Hitler, but Stalin as the danger. Red baiting has become a well-paid journalistic profession among such pseudo-left elements as the Social Democrats and Trotskyites. Although the charges made by the red baiters against the communists are without foundation, they are nevertheless not without effect among the masses because of the Hitler big lie technique that is used to put them across, their constant reiteration with every means at hand. Communists are charged, for example, by reactionary AFL leaders as trying to break up the labor movement. This, notwithstanding the patent fact that communists attach the very greatest importance to the trade unions, more, in fact, by far than do the AFL leaders themselves, both in the defense of the workers' interests under capitalism and as the main force for bringing about socialism. Such charges are made in spite of the facts, too, that the communists have labored devotedly through the years to build up the American labor movement, and that communists are the most decisive leaders in the present-day, rapidly growing labor movements in many European countries. American communists were ardent supporters of unemployment insurance, for example, when the leaders of the AFL were telling the workers that it would destroy the labor unions and American democracy. They have long been militant pioneers for industrial unionism, the organization of the unorganized, the improvement of trade union democracy, the trade union rights of Negroes, the elimination of gangsterism, for labor unity, and every other progressive trade union issue. Another stupid argument of red baiters charges that communists are irresponsibly in favor of strikes and do not care whether they are won or lost. The absurdity of this is demonstrated by two basic facts. First, the communists, being part of the working class, have the same need as all other workers to win the economic advantages that come from victorious strikes. And, second, only if the communists prove themselves to be successful leaders of the workers' everyday struggles under capitalism can they hope to win the workers for the incomparably greater task of establishing socialism. No element in the labor movement, therefore, has a more responsible attitude toward strikes than the communists. None are more careful about launching strikes, and none are more determined to win them once they are called. The communists are opposed to wildcat strikes and stand firmly for united, disciplined action. During the late war, the communists stood second to none in loyally carrying out organized labor's no-strike pledge. Charges by red baiters that the communists, supposedly directed by outside forces, seek to grab control of the unions are equally contrary to the facts. Communists, unlike the Lewises, Dubinskys, and others of their kind, have no machines in the unions. Their role as communists is to teach the workers the principles and policies of Marxism-Leninism. Once the decision of the union is made in a given problem, they follow out loyally the trade union discipline. As for trying to grab leadership in the unions, the communists understand full well the folly of such a course. Communist policy everywhere, in the unions and on the political field, is to work jointly with progressive, non-communist forces. Obviously, such a cooperative policy cannot be successful on the basis of the communists grabbing for control. The fact is that today in the trade union movement generally, the communists, instead of being overrepresented in leading committees and councils, are very much underrepresented, considering the size of their following in the unions. But it is in line with the Hitlerian big lie technique of red baiting to shout that any union or political organization that has even one communist or supposed communist on its executive committee is communist-dominated or is a communist front organization. Red baiters also assert that communists are totalitarians and anti-democratic. Communism is the most democratic movement in the world, economically, politically, and socially. Communist principles call for the ultimate establishment of the most democratic society yet conceived by man, one in which there will be no social classes, no exploitation, and no state, and where everyone will produce according to his ability and receive according to his needs. In line with this fundamental democracy, communists all over the world, including those in the United States, are frontline fighters for every democratic reform under capitalism. They are also the most resolute fighters against fascism, and they are the mainspring in the new democratic governments of Western and Central Europe. In the Soviet Union, where communists lead the nation, the greatest democratic advances in the history of mankind have been achieved. These include the conquest of political power by the workers and farmers, the socialization of industry and the collectivization of the land, the abolition of capitalist exploitation, the doing away with economic crises and mass unemployment, the adoption of the most elaborate system of social insurance in the world, the establishment of complete social and national equality of all the peoples within the USSR, the full emancipation of women, the liquidation of illiteracy, etc., etc. To call communists anti-democratic in the face of all these democratic achievements and struggles is a Hitler big lie of the first order. Communists are also often accused by red baiters of persecuting Catholic workers. This is a monstrous falsehood, too. Communists recognize that Catholic workers have the same economic and political interests as all other workers. They want peace, they want democracy, they want prosperity. So the communists hold out the hand of solidarity to Catholics for the joint accomplishment of these democratic objectives. The communists spare no effort in fighting against religious bigotry, holding that in these critical days it is especially disastrous to engage in religious quarrels from which only reaction can profit. At the same time, the communists consider it politically necessary to condemn the clerical fascist policies now being followed by the Vatican and by the many powerful figures in the Catholic hierarchy in the United States. Lastly, the red baiters never tire of shouting that the communists, because of their friendly attitude toward the Soviet Union, are un-American and agents of a foreign power. This is the greatest of all the Hitlerian big lies of the professional red baiters and reactionaries. In reply to it, the attitude of the communists toward the USSR must be stated under two heads. First, the communists are ardent supporters of friendship between the great American and Soviet peoples. They refuse to take no on this question because collaboration between the USA and the USSR is the key to the progress of world democracy and the maintenance of world peace. Thus, if during the middle 1930s the United States had joined with the USSR in its proposed international front of the democratic powers to maintain world peace, as the communists urged, Hitler's fascism would have been choked in its cradle and World War II would have been prevented. During the Great War against Hitlerism, American-Soviet collaboration, supported by the far-sighted Roosevelt, was actually achieved, and victory in the war was the result. And now, if the peace is to be won and another world war avoided, there absolutely must be American-Soviet collaboration. In fighting for such collaboration, the communists, therefore, are defending our people's most profound national interest. This is Americanism of the highest order. Those red baiters and Soviet haters who are now so busily sowing seeds of dissension between the USA and the USSR are, on the contrary, betraying our country, even though they wrap themselves around with a million pseudo-patriotic phrases. Soviet baiters are imperialist warmongers, and they would have millions of American soldier boys and hosts of civilians die in a fruitless war to advance Wall Street's profits at the expense of the American, Soviet, and other peoples. Second, the USSR is a socialist country. Socialism represents a vast democratic advance over the present social system of capitalism. It indicates the path by which the peoples of the world will finally emancipate themselves from the jungle of present-day society, the breeder of fascism, imperialism, and war. Naturally, communists who advocate socialism as the first stage of communism have a friendly attitude toward this new regime of the USSR, the harbinger of the glorious future of mankind. Their attitude in this respect is very much like that of Democrats all over the world in the years when the American Republic was young. The Democrats of those times understood that the new republic being so painfully reared in our country was a great step forward over the prevailing reactionary feudalistic monarchies. Regardless of the red baiters of those days, these Democrats considered it no act of hostility to their own nation to recognize the advanced character of the very promising new American Republic and to give it their blessing. The communists today take the same position toward the world's most advanced republic of our times, the USSR. The red baiters, for all their violent attacks, will not succeed in killing communist influence in the trade unions. The message of the communists is much too vital for that. The communists, with their Marxist-Leninist analysis of capitalism, their practical everyday economic and political policies, their matchless loyalty to labor, their indomitable fighting spirit, their long record of support of progressive labor policies, and their ultimate goal of a socialist America, will grow, not decline, in influence. All over the world, the communist parties, responding to the burning needs of the peoples, are expanding rapidly in spite of the frantic red baiters. The Communist Party of the United States, with the help of vast numbers of new trade union members, will travel the same victorious path. American labor and the American people need and must have a strong Communist Party. Labor leaders who indulge in the dangerous, fascist-like practice of red baiting are playing the game, whether they realize it or not, of the most reactionary big monopolists, the bitterest enemies of trade unionism and every other phase of American democracy. It's about time, therefore, that red baiting be knocked on the head in the American labor movement. This Hitlerian slander campaign should be recognized for what it is, the spreading of employer-inspired, imperialist warmonger propaganda in the ranks of the workers, in order to destroy their fighting spirit and organization. Trade union progressives, including those who sometimes do a little red baiting themselves in the vain hope of warding off reactionary attacks, should take up the cudgels against the red baiting menace. Red baiting must be eliminated from the trade unions. This is a major necessity for the further strengthening of the labor movement. 1946. Chapter 37. The Trade Unions and Socialism. To meet the ever more complex problems of the post-war period, organized labor must, as we have pointed out, improve its domestic and foreign policies, build a broad new political party, organizationally strengthen the trade unions, unify its forces nationally and internationally, and cleanse its ranks of fascist-like red baiting. But above all, American labor needs to modernize its political conceptions. It must ease worshipping and outworn capitalism and turn its hopes and efforts to the building of a new system of society worthy of the understanding and resources of modern man, socialism. In its earlier competitive stage, capitalism was a progressive system. Under it, modern industry was built, the working class was born, democracy developed, and science made great strides. But now capitalism has become monopolistic. It is in its imperialist period and has grown obsolete and reactionary. The capitalist system is full of incurable contradictions between the social mode of production and the private ownership of industry, between the great producing power and weak purchasing capacity of the workers, between the antagonistic interests of the working class and the capitalist class, between rival imperialist powers, between the imperialist states and the colonial countries, between the capitalist and socialist parts of the world, etc., etc. These contradictions are constantly sharpening and deepening. World capitalism is today in general crisis, and its continued operation produces one disaster after another for tortured humanity. Capitalism, as Marx pointed out long ago, is causing a spreading mass pauperization. This is known by the terrible poverty of China, India, Latin America, and war-torn Europe, and by the awful fact that today at least 1 billion people throughout the world are facing famine conditions. All this misery, none of which is necessary, has been produced by the workings of capitalism in its period of decay. Capitalism is causing an increasing economic chaos throughout the world. Before the war, the periodic economic crises, which are an inevitable result of capitalism, were constantly growing sharper and more prolonged, the 1929-33 crisis being the most severe ever known. And now, particularly in the United States, the stage is being set for another world economic smash-up, once the war boom is over, that will make the terrible crisis of 16 years ago seem like prosperity in comparison. Capitalism today also automatically generates fascism. The great trusts and monopolies find that, with ever-sharpening problems, they cannot continue to rule at home and carry out their program of imperialist aggression abroad without weakening or destroying the democratic organizations and liberties of the people. That is why fascism came to Germany, Italy, Japan, and other countries, and that is the great menace of fascism in the United States. Trusts are born enemies of democracy. Capitalism today also systematically causes wars of unprecedented extent and devastation. The big imperialist states, intent upon world rule for themselves, collide with each other, and the result is war. Twice in one generation, wars have resulted from this basic cause, and now preparations are being hurried for a third and even more terrible world war. Imperialist war is a fundamental expression of the general crisis of capitalism. The capitalist system in the United States is subject to the general economic and political laws that govern capitalism everywhere. It has within it the same basic, destructive contradictions that are undermining world capitalism in general. American capitalism, however, has been favored by history. The United States is a land of vast natural resources. The growth of capitalism here was not seriously hindered by hangovers of feudalistic institutions. The country had literally to be built from the ground up almost within the memory of living man, and instead of being seriously injured by the 2 world wars, which have wrought such havoc with capitalism everywhere, this country actually fattened on them. For the past 30 years, this country's prosperity has largely depended on furnishing war munitions and in repairing the ravages of war. These and other factors have tended to prolong the life and vigor of American capitalism. But the structural weaknesses that have so enfeebled European capitalism will also eventually drag down the seemingly impregnable American capitalism, for both of them are cut from the same cloth. It is absurd to expect, as many do, that the capitalists of this country can instill the breath of life again into the decadent capitalism of the various other nations, and it is equally idle to believe that American capitalism can prosper as a sort of island in a wide sea of sick world capitalism. The world forces of democracy can, by close organization and determined struggle against the monopolists, somewhat lessen the disastrous effects upon the masses of the reactionary tendencies of capitalism. The workers and their allies can win some degree of protection against mass unemployment through social insurance. They can lessen the severity of the inevitable economic crisis by full employment public works programs. They can check the menace of fascism by determined measures of democracy, and by united action they can postpone the outbreak of new wars. It is the task of the workers to fight for as many as possible of these ameliorations under capitalism, but at the same time they must realize that only under socialism can the gross evils produced by capitalism finally be done away with. The establishment of socialism will eliminate these fast-growing evils by striking at their basic root, the private ownership of the social means of production. By the workers and other democratic forces winning political power, and by socializing the industries and the land, abolishing capitalist exploitation, and carrying on production for use instead of for profit, the basis will be laid for a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous world. The root cause of mass poverty is thereby eliminated. Order is introduced into industry. Economic crises and mass unemployment become things of the past. Fascism is uprooted once and for all, and the groundwork for imperialism and war disappears. Socialism supplies the sole answer to poverty, economic chaos, fascism, and war. It is the next higher rung on the social ladder that man has been ascending for ages, and mankind must climb up to socialism or sink into even greater calamities than those which for the past generation have plagued the world. The discovery of atomic energy emphasizes afresh the obsoleteness of capitalism. The monopoly capitalists, alarmed that this new and great power will create havoc among their industries by increasing economic crises and by rendering huge amounts of investments useless, are already moving to stifle the development of atomic energy. About the sole use they are looking forward to for this tremendous source of power is to make it into atomic bombs. Only a socialist system, based on production for use and not for personal profit, can make full use of the revolutionary discovery of atomic energy. The Soviet Union has proved the workability of socialism. It has made an end of capitalist exploitation and laid the basis for the general democracy and prosperity of its people. It has done away completely with economic crises and mass unemployment that are such terrible scourges under capitalism. It has abolished the capitalist bankers, industrialists, and landlords who are the poison source of imperialism, famine, and war. And these great democratic achievements were accomplished by the USSR in spite of a hostile capitalist world, which tried by armed intervention, civil war, economic blockade, political isolation, and imperialist invasion to smash the Soviet system. The capitalists of the world hate and fear the USSR, not because they dread an attack by the Red Army upon their countries, but primarily because they are afraid of the effects the example of a successful socialist system will have upon the oppressed millions of the earth. The vast majority of the workers in Europe are now socialist in outlook. They are drawing the needful elementary lesson that the recurring economic crises, fascism, and wars take place because capitalism is obsolete and reactionary, and they are looking forward to the abolition of that system altogether. Today, although often under untrustworthy social democratic leaders, such as the Attlees and Bevins in Great Britain, they are carrying through far-reaching programs for the nationalization of basic industries, and tomorrow they will take up more definitely the building of socialism itself. The great body of American workers, unlike their European brothers and sisters, have not yet, however, adopted a socialist perspective. This is, as we have seen, because of the relatively more favorable position of capitalism in the United States. But the American workers are also on the march ideologically. The Hoover economic crisis and the reforms of the Roosevelt regime made them think deeply and caused them to lose much of their old-time faith in so-called free enterprise, a concept that means to leave the economic system to the tender care of the capitalists and all will be well. The workers now know that only if the government intervenes with public works programs, farm subsidies, and the like, can industry be kept going. This is a big stride forward ideologically. It means that the American working class, with its faith in capitalism weakening, is taking its first hesitant steps on the road towards socialism. Nor can there be any doubt but that the next big economic crisis will cause among the masses of American workers widespread demands for the nationalization of basic industries and, on the part of the more advanced workers, for socialism. A socialist perspective has now become an urgent necessity for the American working class, for only when the workers and their leaders begin to grasp the principles of Marxism-Leninism can they understand what is happening to world capitalism, and only then will they be in a position to take the necessary measures, now and in the future, to protect themselves and the world from the disasters of poverty, fascism, and war caused by the decaying capitalist system. It is indeed time that the leaders of the trade unions stop parroting the free enterprise slogans of the capitalists. The acquirement of a socialist outlook by the labor movement will be the greatest step forward it has ever taken. It will register the maturity of the American trade unions. Our country has before it a glorious future, but not under capitalism. The capitalist system can bring us only more and deeper tragedies until finally the workers and their political allies see fit to put an end to it. Socialism will come when the majority of our people demand it. The workers of the world are marching forward to socialism. The American labor movement must take its proper place in their invincible ranks. 1946. That is the end of chapter 37 and the end of today's video. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. Have a good day.